she works constantly and continually. Her life work is this, and you'll see from the presentation. She'll make mention of it, but I'll just draw attention to it. There's a book in the back, the Calendar Project, and this is something she did about a decade ago, Sister Raketi. It's about a decade ago. Yeah, I mean, she did this work about a decade ago, and that is, it's called the Calendar Project, and it gives you an understanding of what time and how time was developed. She's a linguist. She is one of the world's leading authority on Medu Neter. She may not want to make that claim, but we would, because we acknowledge her. And Medu Neter is what they erroneously call the hieroglyphics. The people of Kemetic call it the Medu Neter. And if you really want to get an understanding of what that is, she teaches it, and she will make announcements as to when classes will start, and that's a recommended course, because if you take a course on Medu Neter, it would open your eyes to a whole new world, and it would clear a lot of confusion. A lot of confusion. And, you know, the sister is very good at it. She is indeed a teacher. And so with that as a background, I know we all have been patiently waiting for her. And she's going to take us back maybe as far as 6,239 years. Let's welcome a true daughter of the sun, Sister Raketi.
I'm glad to be here. It's so interesting always to hear Earl talk. He has such great wisdom. And I enjoy and appreciate everything he has to say. You have to forgive me for sitting down today, but I have a bad knee and I just can't stand up. So I'll sit down. I've been scheduled to talk about the calendar, and I know that in the world we live in and the times we live in where there's so many things going on and so many crises and so many things that confront us and so much we have to do, that the calendar may seem like a trivial, unimportant thing to talk about. But it's not. It's really not really unimportant at all. It's a matter of culture. It's a cultural thing. And culture is most significant in the liberation of African people. So the calendar really turns out to be a very pertinent and interesting topic to talk about. And everybody's talking about the year 2000. And that's what Inuni wanted me to really address today. What is the year 2000? What does it mean? Does it have any meaning for us, etc.? And I think everybody in this room already knows that the year 2000 is the white man's thing, and it really doesn't have anything to do with us. But I'd like to really tell you more specifically why. I think you might be interested in knowing that. So I'm going to share those things with you. When I was putting my lecture together, I really didn't know where to start because there's so many places to start. But just when I was sitting in the back, I decided to turn it around from the way I'd originally planned it and just talk briefly first about the concept of time and what is time, and just to start off with time before I get into the calendar in the year 2000. Now this is just purely philosophical, but it is interesting, and it is very it's very important and meaningful for us if we really think about it. So let me just kind of review some of the ideas that I have about time, and when we get to the question and answer period, we can have a lot of fun by really delving more deeply into it with some of your own ideas, suggestions, thoughts, and questions on the matter. Time is, when all the dictionaries basically say that time is an interval between events, that in order to really measure time, you have to have events and to measure it by. And one of the things that we always talk about is time and space in the Western world. We consider in our universe for there to be time, space, and matter. And those ideas were ideas that were really developed, not invented or created by, but developed by Isaac Newton, one of the European philosophers and thinkers during the 15th century. And he tried to really discuss the idea of there being something called absolute time that was measurable absolutely all the time, from any place and anywhere that this time was measurable. And so now, whenever we talk about our universe and give a model of the universe that we live in, people always say that there is this idea of time and space and matter. And most of us have grown up with that and kind of consider those ideas to be very real. However, there are many people in the world who don't even have a concept of time or space or matter as we do in the universe. For example, many Native Americans and many African people don't even have a word in their language that you could even translate as time, that you can even translate as space. They don't even have words that you can translate as past, present, and future. And their models of the universe don't consist of a universe made up of time and space and matter at all. So it's really absurd for us to think that everybody on the planet Earth has the same vision of the universe and understanding of time and space as we do, because they do not. And it's very interesting because modern science has even moved away from those concepts of time and space and matter a long, long time ago. It just hasn't really caught up with people yet. In African languages, even in Medu Neter, there's no word for time or space or past, present, or future. And in Medu Neter, like many other African languages, you cannot even translate, verbs, the verbal system in the language don't even show tense. Tenses are times that you put on verbs like I go, I went, I will go. Those are tenses, and all verbs in English are conjugated for tenses. And in Medu Neter and other African languages and many Native American languages and other languages in the world, they don't even conjugate verbs for tense, because they don't have the same concept of time as we do in the Western world. The concept of linear time is the concept that we find here. Time is measurable and is the intervals between events measured in a continuing, flowing manner from past, present to future at equal rates. That's how we conceive of time. That's how our clocks are set up, our calendars are set up. These ideas, once they were combined with writing, became very conducive to cultures, culture, and the culture itself developed more or less based upon these ideas of times and space as they are presented in the Western world. And along with writing, then we began to get things like records, diaries, bookkeeping, accounting, mathematics, interest in sequence dating, in calendars, and interest in clocks, chronology, time graphs, annals, histories, historical attitude, interest in the past, etc., things like this. We are stimulated in the Western world by the use of calendars and clocks for measuring. The notion of linear time suggests that when one event has occurred, then it's over and it's done with, and it's never to occur again. However, it's interesting because other people don't see events in the same way. And who is to say that when an event is locked in, that we could actually lock events into a linear time frame, or that we can actually lock events into a linear line, or that we can lock it in those respective, in that perspective, in the sense of time that we have in our clock or intervals. And one thing that might help you to look at that whole idea about locking events into intervals, into time spaces, and a linear framework. Many people have, for example, premonitions, and sometimes people can actually see something or dream something, and they can, in a form, about something that's going to happen tomorrow or 5 years from now or sometime in the future. And then when the time actually arrives, that time later, tomorrow or 5 years or sometime in the future, the same exact event could happen exactly as that person has seen it. Now, this has happened to many of us. It's a natural phenomenon of life. That event, we would have to say, occurs more than once. It occurred in our minds, and it actually occurs again somewhere down the road in the future. That event is not locked into a time frame of reference or a spatial frame of reference. That event is a reality in the cosmos, and it is locked into nothing. The Native Americans have something they call dream time, and they say that they don't call it dream time, because time is not, they don't even have the word time in their language, but they have another way of explaining it. And the best way maybe to talk about it in our own thought is we'll just call it dreaming. That is as real to them as the physical world. That everything in your mind is really happening in real time, in real space, that it's a real occurrence. And for us, it's just a dream. And we basically say it's in our minds. You know, it's a physical thing. It becomes a physical thing in the Western world. But for Native Americans, it's not just a physical thing. It's metaphysical. And it really exists. It exists as much. That event that you saw, that in your dream, in your mind, that really happens 5 years down the road, just as you saw it, is just as real the time that you dream it as it is when it really occurs. Events are in space like waves, like atoms, like neutrinos, like everything else. They are real here. And I can't even talk about this. This is basically physics. And physics has already proven that these things, that the metaphysical world is as important and real as the physical world. There's the deja vu things that you saw it before, something that happened before that you see again. And in other words, I guess what I'm trying to say is that our universe is not one consisting of linear time and space or absolute anything. That is free range movement in many different forms, and things are not locked into them. And basically, another important thing to say about it is that the way that the Western world sees time and space and everything else I'm going to talk about today is not the way that African people have understood time and space ever. And it's not the way that we should approach it or understand it or use it in our future as well. I might come back to that. Let's go into the calendar, since that's really the topic of my discussion today, the calendar. Just briefly, a calendar is something that is a tool that's used to measure days and months and years. Specifically, all calendars on Earth, the calendars that we use on Earth, of course, are based upon the motions of the planets they're based on the sun or the moon, or some calendars based upon stellar movement as well. But this is going back to my whole notion of time and space. Suppose we lived on another planet or in another universe. Then our calendars, if we had a calendar, we wouldn't need a calendar, or what use would a calendar be? We would have a different basis for measuring, if that's what we wanted to do, our lives. And so a calendar is something of choice that's used here on Earth, based upon the sun and the moon, namely, by societies to measure time or intervals. Calendars were developed in Kemet and in the ancient world, mainly for some specific reasons. I know in ancient Kemet, the main use of the calendar was to determine or to fix religious celebrations in the society. Most of the calendars that you look at from ancient Kemet basically are calendars of holidays and celebrations. They were great astronomers, and the calendar has other purposes which I'm going to talk about, but the main function of the society, or the calendar in society, was to fix the date of the celebrations, like the New Year's, for example, and the Feast of the Valley, and the renewing of the Nasutbidi, the kingship, etc. That was the main reason. And even the calendars that we have today are used to recognize and to fix the date of holidays, national holidays, cultural holidays, religious and spiritual holidays. They were also used to regulate not in ancient times, but in modern times, to regulate economic activity. For example, the 7-day week was founded or started in its use mainly to create and develop a 7-day work week. And then for wages, for debts, for business, for interest, for loans, for accounting, and all the things that go with business. That's why you need a calendar, so that you can keep that, the economic aspect of your society regulated and controlled. Then the calendar is also used for chronology, and that is for determining historical facts and information, sequence dating, and the writing of histories. In ancient times, the use of calendars for economic activity, especially in Kemet and other parts of Africa, were not, it wasn't really used for that, nor was it used for chronologies and historical dating. The calendar, however, was the invention of the Kemetic people. They were the first ones to have a solar calendar based upon the revolution of the Earth and the other planets around the sun. In ancient times, other people had lunar calendars based upon the moon cycles, which is a very valid and good calendar too. However, the Kemites discovered the solar year, and they created or developed a calendar based upon that. But they also had other calendars as well. They also developed a calendar that was based on the star Sirius, or Kemetic, which rises heliacally or together with the sun once a year on the same day. And they developed a calendar also that was based upon the Celtic year, which was 1,460 years. So they had the lunar calendar, the Celtic calendar, as well as the solar calendar, and they used all three of them. The calendar that the Kemites used was the calendar that fit most with the society or the place in which they lived. They lived in an agricultural society, and the solar calendar basically corresponds more with, or the solar year basically corresponds more with the agricultural setting. However, they did not use a calendar for agricultural purposes. just like anywhere in the world, I can't think of even one place where a calendar is used to regulate agriculture, because for agriculture, you don't need a calendar. It's basically regulated by the season. So people, if they were looking at a calendar to determine when it was time to plant or when it was time to harvest, the crops would be awry, because you don't need to say, oh, it's March 1st, it's time to plow, and it's April 1st and it's time to plant. Those things are known naturally by the natural phenomena of the atmosphere. The Kemetic calendar was so popular, the solar calendar, in ancient times, that the Greeks and the Romans decided to use that calendar as well, even though they had been using a lunar calendar. And so they borrowed the Kemetic calendar, and they made changes upon it. They rearranged the months and the days in the calendar. And the calendar that you have on your wall today is the ancient Kemetic calendar, which has been rearranged and changed from the ancient form. Most of you have seen the calendar that I had a chance to do with Brother Reese, and you could see that it was a calendar that was very precise and specific, and that the arrangement is different than the one that we have on our wall today. Those arrangements were made by the Greeks and the Romans, and today the calendar that we use is the Gregorian calendar, which is still the ancient Kemetic calendar, with all of the changes that have been made upon it. But those changes that have been made upon it are really significant and important for us to think about. First of all, some of the changes that have been made upon it are breaking it down into weeks of a 7-day week. That idea of the 7-day week derived from the idea of the Christian church, who had said that it basically took God 7 days to create the world. And so the 7-day week, and on the Sabbath day he rested. So the 7-day week represents a Christian religious observance. It also, by the way, corresponds to something that's happening with the moon and the lunar cycles, because in 7 days, the moon basically goes through a quarter. And so it takes basically 7 days for the quarter lunar cycle as well. But the Christians were using the lunar calendar originally. So the 7-day week, and the names of the days of the week, which are named after their gods and their mythological gods, are names that belong to the Teutonic and the Saxon and the Nordic people, who actually gave names to those 7 days. And so therefore they represent Western civilization, and so do the names of the months. The names of the months of the ancient Kemetic calendar were very, very different. As a matter of fact, they didn't even have names for their months originally, and they didn't have a 7-day week because they basically had 10-day cycles, none of which were named in any way, but just numbered. Actually, their calendar originally just numbered the days and the months from 1 to 30. The Kemites, so the calendar that we have on our wall today is the ancient Kemetic calendar that has many, many changes that have been made upon it. And the changes that have been made upon it represent Western ideas, Western culture. A calendar is a cultural thing. And on the calendars, on the Gregorian calendars that we have on our wall, the names of the days of the week are Western gods, the names of Western gods, and the names of the months are also, as well as the holidays that are on the calendar. and the observances that are on the calendar, as well as the arrangement of the calendar, which itself was rearranged to represent political institutions of the Western Greek and Roman world. So therefore, that calendar is not at all relevant to African people. Let us look at chronology and calendars and where the year 2000 came from. Let me just find this for a second. So I have to kind of read some of these things because I don't know all of it by heart, and it's kind of difficult. It's a lot of little details, and I haven't really been studying or looking at the calendar since the time I really did the calendar project. I just don't use it, and I just don't agree with it, and I try to convince other people all the time that the calendar is irrelevant to African people. So all the specific details really is moot, to tell you the truth. But I think it's interesting to look at the year 2000. What does that really mean, and what does it really mean for African people? How does it relate to us? The year 2000 designates, the year 2000 designates 2,000 years since the birth of Jesus Christ. The year 1997 or 1998, in which we now live, means it is 1,998 years after the life of Christ. And how does that fit in? How does that relate to us, or what real meaning does that have to us? I can go to the details, and I'll go through some of the details in a minute of how it doesn't and how that date actually came about. But if we really, one of the questions that you might really ask is, well, doesn't that year have some astronomical significance or importance? And therefore, we could really look at it as being really significant in the cosmos. And what my little research is meant to show you today is that it doesn't have any significance, even astronomically. So let us just look at that briefly. Many people, I just want to find this too. Many different people in the world have their own dates, their own points from which they start their calendars. And those people in the world who do have calendars, by the way. In a chronology, what you need is a starting point, a date or a place to start your calendar, to start counting from. Now, we all know that the world is much older than 1,998 years. So so the question that you want to ask is, where did we start counting from? Where did we actually start counting from? Or where did people start counting from? Well, different people start counting at different points. The Hebrew have a calendar. And their calendar, the present date on their calendar is 5759. If you ask a Jewish person, what is the year? They'll say 5759. And they started counting, obviously, 59 years ago. Actually, they started counting, and that date on the Christian calendar would be 3761 BC, Western time. Then the Coptic Christians have a calendar. They started counting 2,282 years ago. And they started counting, did I tell you that, excuse me, because I don't remember if I mentioned this, that the Jewish calendar begins with their creation, their date of the creation of the world. They considered the creation of the world to be 5,759 years ago. Of course, they know better now, but when they started counting and they developed their calendar, that was the date that they had chose for to begin their counting of their calendar, the date of creation. The Coptic Christians started counting at the persecutions of the Christians under Diocletian, and that was 2,282 years ago. Or on the Christian calendar, it would be it would be August 29th, 284 BC. Then the Muslims have a calendar. If you ask a Muslim person practicing Islam, what is the year? They will tell you, I think, 1376. And that represents, they started their calendar counting at the Hijra, if I'm pronouncing it right. That was the time that Muhammad flew from Mecca to Medina. And that event occurred on the Christian calendar, 622 AD. And so that would mean now the year would be 1376. That's where they started counting. So, and other people in the world have calendars too. The Chinese have a calendar. I'm not going to get into all the different calendars, but everyone starts counting from a different place. The Christians started counting from the birth of Christ, and I'm going to talk about that more specifically. The year, the idea of a Christian era for chronological reckoning of years was actually started by a Roman abbot named Dionysius Exeges in what would be today on our calendar 532 AD. So in 532 AD, Dionysius Exegesis proposed a calendar that would begin with the birth of Christ. And before that, there wasn't a calendar that began with the birth of Christ or that had an era. The first year of the era he would designate as AD 1. And AD comes from the Latin Anno Domini, which means in the year of our Lord. The immediately preceding year he would call BC 1. Dionysius' purpose was to determine and to fix the date of Easter. In other words, the reason why he wanted to establish a calendar based upon the life of Christ was he wanted to fix the date of Easter so that Easter could be celebrated every year at about the same time. And of course, Easter is the birthday of Jesus Christ. His tabular calendar was based on the older calendar of the Coptic Christian Church, which was the calendar that was being used in the Christian world at the time. And that's the calendar that I just told you about that started counting during the persecution of the Christians under Diocletian. That calendar began in what was 248, and it was the year. In other words, it was the year 200. It was 248 years after the persecution of the Christians that Dionysius lived, and that was the time that he decided to set the date for the beginning, the era, the starting of the counting from the birth of Christ. And he decided that he would put the date back to 284 years before the persecution of the Christians under Diocletian. And by doing that, that would make the year in which he was living, in which he was planning and establishing all of this, 532 AD on his new Christian calendar. Did you understand that? No. You have to write it down to understand it. Maybe I need to write it down and pass it out so that everyone can understand it. But basically, I actually wrote a little thing retracing the argument that during the persecution of the Coptic Christians under Diocletian, they established a calendar that they began with year 1. And 248 years later, from that time that they established their calendar, a man was living, a Roman abbot Dionysius Exegesis, and he wanted to make a calendar of his own for the Christians, starting with the birth of Christ. And so he said the birth of Christ occurred probably, I suppose. We don't know how he decided to do this. 284 years before the Coptic calendar began. And when that would mean that counting from those 280 years before to the time that he was living would be 532 AD. So what I'm saying is that the first use of the Christian era began in 532 AD, began in use on 532 AD on the Christian calendar. It's all very confusing, but it even gets more confusing, and that'll bring up the point that I'm going to make in the end. Was there any fixed astronomical or mathematical phenomena upon which Dionysius Exegesis produced his date? No, there was not. It was based upon, first of all, the Coptic dates, which was, the persecution of the Christians. And when he put the dates back 284 years, we really don't know why. But whether that corresponded to any great astronomical event or something that was actually measurable, doubtfully, and we just don't know. So that is how the Christian era came into being. An era is a point, is a time, it's in the chronology of a starting time, a point from which to start counting. And it is something always significant in the culture of the people that are establishing the calendar. So the Christian era, based upon the life of Christ, is something significant in the Christian Western world, from which they started their counting. And the year 2000 is 2,000 years AD, Anno Domini, after the Christians began counting their calendar based upon the birth of Christ, which